Somewhere above a city street, a crow watches cars stop at a red light, waiting on one thing before it moves. It's not scared of traffic. It's using it, dropping a nut onto the crosswalk, letting tires crack the shell, then walking out for the pieces once the light turns red. We built our whole idea of intelligence around brains like ours. Hands, tools, planning ahead. So are animals actually more intelligent than we ever gave them credit for? Or are we just using the wrong tools to measure them? Let's start with the actual problem, because it's bigger than most people realize. You can't ask an animal what it's thinking. So for most of the last century, scientists built stand-ins instead, ways to guess at a mind you can't interview directly. Take the pointing test. Hide food, then point at the new spot, and watch whether the animal takes a hint from a completely different species. Your dog would ace this without blinking. A chimpanzee, oddly, usually can't. Now, flip to the mirror test. Mark an animal's forehead while it's asleep. Sit it in front of a mirror, and see whether it reaches for its own face instead of threatening the stranger in the glass. Touch the mark, and you've supposedly just proven you know that reflection is you. Both tests share the same quiet flaw. They were designed by a hand-using, eye-dominant species, then handed to animals that navigate the world through neither. A dog aces the pointing test and fails the mirror test miserably, not because it lacks a sense of self, researchers now argue, but because we asked a nose to solve a puzzle built for eyes. A fish or an octopus never had a chance at either test, and nobody thought to ask why the test itself might be the problem. None of that would have caught what happened in a lab outside Oxford in 2002, when researchers gave a crow named Betty a short, straight piece of wire and put food just out of reach below her. Betty bent the wire into a hook on her first try, a shape no one had ever taught her, or any crow before her. No pointing, no mirror, no test built with her in mind at all. She simply needed a hook, so she made one. That's the kind of moment that makes you wonder how much intelligence we've missed, just because we never built a test shaped like the animal standing in front of us. So in 2014, one team decided to stop guessing about all of this and just run the numbers, at a scale nobody had attempted before. A researcher at Duke University tested 567 animals across 36 species, birds, primates, elephants, on 2 tasks measuring one specific skill: self-control. Could the animal resist reaching straight for food it could see through a clear tube, and instead take the longer route it had already learned actually worked? The result surprised almost everyone involved, including the people who ran it. It wasn't the animals with the biggest brain relative to their body size that won. It was the animals with the biggest brain, period. No ratio, no adjustment for size. And among the primates, the sharpest ones weren't the most social. They were the ones with the messiest diet, the species that had to track dozens of different foods, across dozens of seasons, in dozens of different places. It's not how many friends a species keeps track of. It's how many things it has to remember not to eat wrong, or too early, or in the wrong order. Here's where it gets stranger, because that finding should make you nervous if you've ever assumed bigger brain, smarter animal. That assumption breaks almost immediately once you look closer. Take the elephant. In 2014, researchers in Rio de Janeiro did something almost nobody had done before. They counted, cell by cell, every neuron in an elephant's brain. The total came to 257 billion, 3 times more than a human brain holds. If raw neuron count alone made a mind, an elephant should outthink you without trying. Except when the researchers looked only at the cortex, the wrinkled outer layer that does the actual heavy lifting of thought, the elephant had 5.6 billion neurons there. You have 16.3 billion. Almost all of an elephant's neurons, it turns out, sit somewhere else entirely, wired mostly to run that enormous, unbelievably precise trunk. It's not the size of the brain that decides how sharp a mind is. It's how many of its cells are actually assigned to think, instead of just assigned to move. Then, there's the kind of evidence that isn't about counting cells at all. It's about watching a mind outperform yours in real time, The kind of thing you'd have to see to believe. At Kyoto University in 2007, researchers flashed the numbers 1 through 9 onto a touchscreen for a fifth of a second, then hid them and asked whoever was watching to tap where each one had appeared. A young chimpanzee named Ayumu did this faster and more accurately than the university student sitting right next to him. Not close, either. Later, other scientists pointed out something fair. Ayumu had trained on that exact screen for years. The humans he beat had never seen it before in their lives. Give a person the same practice, and most of the gap closes. It's not that the chimpanzee is simply built smarter than you are. It's that his brain got years of practice yours never had the chance to get, which is almost more unsettling than the original claim, because it means a 5-year-old chimpanzee's raw wiring and yours start out a lot closer than either species probably wants to admit. Now picture it from the other side for a second. You, from a crow's point of view. A strange, upright shape that never quite behaves the way prey or predator is supposed to. You carry fire in your pocket. You drive machines that crush shells without even noticing. You disappear behind glass and reappear somewhere else entirely, and nothing about you follows the rules a bird has spent its whole life learning. A crow watching you doesn't see a slow, hairless ape. It sees something that reshapes the entire landscape just by walking through it, then somehow forgets that it did that. We built the tests. We wrote the rules for what counts as thinking. And then we were the ones who got surprised when a bird figured out how to use us as a tool. Here's the obvious objection, and it deserves saying out loud instead of getting quietly ignored. None of this proves real thought. These are trained animals, rewarded with food every single time they get it right. A pigeon will peck at almost anything if pecking gets it fed. Maybe what looks like intelligence is just a very patient trainer and a very hungry subject, dressed up in a lab coat and a press release. That's fair. Nearly everything you just heard happened in a controlled room, with a researcher watching, a reward waiting, and years of repetition behind it. But there is one case that breaks that explanation completely. Because it didn't happen in a lab, nobody was offering a reward, and nobody taught it to happen at all. We can watch what an animal does. We can time it, count it, run it through a statistics program 1,000 times over. What we can't do is climb inside that single moment and find out what it actually felt like to be there. Whether there was any experience attached to the behavior at all, or just a very sophisticated machine quietly running its programming, with nobody home. Scientists call this the hardest problem in the entire field, and they mean it literally. You can prove a mind reacts. You cannot prove what it is like to be that mind reacting. So hold both of those thoughts at once, because the last thing you're about to hear sits right inside that gap. In June of 2022, in a rainforest reserve in Sumatra, researchers tracking a wild male orangutan named Rakus noticed a fresh wound beneath his eye, almost certainly from a fight with another male. 3 days later, Rakus did something no one had ever documented in a wild orangutan before. He found a vine that orangutans in that forest almost never touch, chewed its leaves without swallowing them, and pressed the juice directly onto his own wound, again and again. Then he covered the entire cut with the chewed pulp, like a bandage. He came back to that same vine and did it again the next day. Nobody had shown him how. There was no food reward waiting for him anywhere. There was only a wound, a plant his own species mostly ignores, and whatever it was that told him this one, use this one, right here. 5 days later, the wound had closed. Within a month, it had healed clean, with no infection at all, and barely a scar. You could call that instinct. You could call it luck, one animal stumbling onto the right leaf at exactly the right moment. Or you could sit with the fact that somewhere in a forest that has nothing to do with us, alone, with no one watching and nothing to gain, an animal reached for something specific, applied it with precision, and walked away healed. The same quiet, private negotiation with pain you would recognize instantly if a person did it to themselves in a hospital bed. We built the tests. We wrote the rules for what counts as a mind, and where it stops. Somewhere in that forest, an orangutan never read the rules. Neither did the crow waiting for the light to turn red. Neither did the one with the piece of wire, back at the very start of all this. Maybe you haven't either. You just don't know it yet.